Okay, perfect. Let's start. Thank you very much, everyone, for being here today, either physically in the lecture hall or online. Today we're gonna celebrate the end of the, well, sort of, or more or less, the end of the EMARC program in landscape urbanism. As you notice, well, not everybody is able to make it at the lecture hall because of the conditions we are living through, but it's anyways a good occasion to be all together and talk about the projects that students have been producing in the last few months. We have today the presentation of four projects, three of them individual, one of them is a group of two, and I'm just gonna explain briefly to some of the juries that are here present what is the brief that we've been working on and that the students base their projects. So as the past few years we've been working on the idea of looking at some of potential policies based on a Green New Deal that can tackle the climate crisis, and how those policies that could come from that potential set of policies could be consolidated or concretized into landscapes, no? Depending on how they're looking at, whether from the mobility aspects, from renewable energy, from issues about retrofitting in the building industry, etc. So what you will see today is ideas on how those policies will affect the landscapes, whether urban or rural. And so the format of today is students have prepared a video, so they can share the video. The video will last around 12 to 15 minutes, I think, depending on the content, and then we'll have around 25 minutes for conversation with the jurors. So we have today as juries Ed Wall, who is a long friend and colleague from landscape. He's joining us today. He's an academic leader in the Greenwich University, and also is a visiting professor in the Polytechnic of Milan. He has had now a long number of publications and books that are all a reference for everyone in the profession. So, and it's been an external examiner for, I think, for the past 5 years. So it's great to have him here back in the school and the lecture hall. Thank you, Ed. We have also John Cook, who is a tutor in the School of Architecture in Westminster, and he's also been very interested in the issues about the Green New Deal policies. No, I think the brief they run in Westminster School together with Ben Pollock are always also looking at how those policies concretize in architectural projects. So I think for us and for him, I guess, will be interesting to have these conversations and see how this can perhaps evolve in longer future collaborations. And we also have Teresa Stopani, who the students know already. She's been running seminars, history and tourism seminars, but she hasn't been seen the projects of the EMARCs for some time. So I think it will be actually quite good to see what she thinks about what you've managed to do in the last few months. And obviously we have the tutors. I don't know if Eduardo wants to say something, who is in Spain at the moment, but yeah, joining us online. Do you want to say something?
Well, no, thanks for the introduction. I think it's great. Let's see what comes out of these final projects of landscape urbanism and marks. I hope we'll have a meaningful discussion. I think that the projects have benefited from the fact that they were sharing part of the exercise with the MSc students that finalized at the end of the summer. So we shall see more mature, longer-term projects and discussions than we've seen in the past, which I think it's going to be. It's a different type of project, but equally interesting. And let's see what comes out, really. And then later on, we'll have a keynote lecture by Ed, which I think shall help to wrap up a very interesting morning of landscape urbanism.
Yeah.
So thanks for all the jurors. I think we've introduced them all, haven't we?
Yeah.
Well,
Yeah.
we
We also have Clara Lores,
Clara as
who's
well.
the studio master, who will be
Clara,
here as well, and Daniel Kish, who is joining us in the lecture hall, who's also.
Oh, okay. Sorry, I didn't
technical
see.
tutor. Yeah.
Good.
No, it's fine. Well, let's start. No, I think Jufan is first in the list. If you want to come over here and run your video, then we can have a discussion after that. Thank you very much, and let's start today. You can introduce yourself.
Well, hello. I'm in a group of Away with the Cars project, and I had two colleagues before, and we were interested about how to design about the transport system and network, and to do something like reconnecting the city. So this what we have done before, and this turn I'm more focused on something different from previous one. So yeah, so maybe I can just share something with you.
Can you talk closer to the microphone, because we can hear you very far away?
Yeah. Can you hear me? Hello?
Now it's much better.
Okay.
Now it's much better.
Yeah. So maybe I can start. Yeah.
As we know, the impacts of car urbanism are huge, and the environment, pollution, and climate change have become serious problems. Greenhouse gas emissions from transport account for 19% to 22% of total emissions for many years. In addition, the car has bad direct impacts on people living in the city. In order to solve the issues caused by the car, we focused on thinking about how to solve this problem by improving the transport network. After a 15-minute city case study, we encourage low-carbon mobility by improving the connectivity of urban road networks. By using space syntax analysis in MSC's project, my colleague and I identified the roads that are difficult to get access to, and then to find out the vectors that stop people's travel in reality by satellite maps checking and site visiting. The intention of this project was to improve east-west connection in Haringey-Borough, as well as improve the local connection with high streets. The first design was connecting the east-west by improving the road environment in Penstock Tunnel. The second site is the Wood Green Town Centre. By studying its historical evolution, a building that stops the connectivity of short travel was replaced with a small square in the city. The previous idea of reconnecting the city by demolishing some barriers is important, but it is also important to focus on how to use the existing streets. In London, streets make up 80% of public space, as in many cities. The typical street is an asphalt-paved surface with buried utilities and pedestrian footpaths on both sides, separated from the carriageway by parallel parking and loading bays. How to give the street back to people? As the COVID-19 continues to disrupt our daily life, a micromobility revolution is quietly moving forward. The design and range of lightweight human-powered and electric vehicles has evolved and adoption quickly expanded, filling the streets with every shape, size, and color. Micromobility has the potential to give more spaces and more safety to people. It will be a good changing point to achieve efficient and cost-efficient travel, reduced traffic congestion, decreased emissions, and a boost to a local economy. A research found that in the UK, shared bicycles and scooters could replace nearly 70% of short-distance vehicle trips. Londoners make 8.17 million daily trips by motorized modes that could be cycled. More than half of the potential trips are made by car. And in Haringey Borough, There are around 220,000 trips could be cycled each day. Excluding public transport modes, as well as factors such as old age or disability, there are still 102,000 vehicle trips could be cycled in Haringey. And most half of all potentially cyclable trips are made for shopping and leisure purposes, with 1 in 6 made for commuting reasons. While there is a lot of potential for micromobility, however, there are existing barriers to active travel. In Haringey, there are 3 main types of barriers: traffic, railway lines, wall, fence, and building. The main traffic comes from the main roads, and additionally, some local roads and even residential streets can be barriers to active travel due to the conditions created by heavy and fast traffic. The railway lines are huge barriers to the implementation of the micromobility plan in Haringey, and even affected the connection between the east and the west. Barriers and bottlenecks are generally associated with the north-south viaduct train lines, which result in limited crossing opportunities of the railways. The third one is about fence, building, and car park barriers. Sometimes they could be seen as soft civilians. They refer to features that impact on the or visibility of routes, but do not necessarily stop the route. There are 2 main case studies. One strategy mentioned in the 2014 London Cycling Design Standards. In a properly joined up cycle network, cyclists should not have to travel more than 400 meters to get to a parallel route of similar quality. In this project, the mesh analysis should be integrated with areas with high travel purposes and actual barriers. The second case is London Street Family, which functionally divides the streets of London with 2 major evaluation indicators: the movement function and the place function. Movement is about commuting. Place is related to the significance of economic, cultural, and community activities. But these metrics and guidance are based only on existing street functions. Perhaps we should consider how to change the functions of some streets and transform them into new functions. So the strategy has 3 steps: network improvement, street function redefining, and detailed design. According to Haringey's existing bicycle network to analyze the mesh density, and it is based on 400 meters by 400 meters as basic unit. The blue areas are gaps in the borough, including 4 large areas where there is not a cycle route within 800 meters. The mesh density analysis and travel purposes were then combined and the barriers are taken into account. On the one hand, the proposal is to increase the density of cycle routes at the borough scale and local scale. On the other, it puts suggestions to address micromobility barriers in Haringey. After proposing the new plan, the next step is to look at street function, because we need to know how to let micromobility and other street users to coexist, and how to change the existing functions. So look at existing and planning cycle networks and check out their existing function. Summarizing from previous cases, the aim is to redefine the street function by creating a new matrix for micromobility and pedestrian. So stage 1 is to set significance and priority for different modes of transport in Haringey. The M value could be divided into 3 types. According to this definition, street will be changed for micromobility users and pedestrians. Then combining it with the place value to do further place-making design, and people will have more spaces to do other activities. In order to redefine the street more clearly, road hierarchy and urban realm were also taken into account. Then a new classification is proposed. So jumping to the design. The first design site is the Penstock Tunnel and the surrounding area. The idea is to make greenways become one of the important links for micromobility, with the role of connecting Ali Pali and Wood Green Town Centre. The most obvious problem with this path is invisibility, and many people who do not live in here often ignore that there is a little path due to the fences surrounding Hornsey water treatment works. And since it has been seen on the Haringey Council website that this area may become open land, it is suggested to add 1 new route in this area that is mainly for the movement of micromobility users and pedestrians. During the site filming, I missed this path because I really did not notice it. The issue is the same as previous one, and there is no suitable width for both cyclists and pedestrians to use at the same time. So the design appropriately broadens the space and really recommend to better visualize the entrance. The new river path is constrained by the fence on the left and the railway on the right, and the width needs to be appropriately increased for cyclists and pedestrians, while the fence is recommended to be removed near the river on the left to create a space suitable for pedestrians to walk and enjoy the nature. The problem with the penstock tunnel is bad lighting, unfriendly environment, and especially the corner where cyclists and pedestrians often bumped into each other due to the narrow and sharp turn. So the idea is to expand the space at the entrance to the tunnel, as well as separate the sidewalk from the bike lane inside the tunnel. In conclusion, the roads in this area are mainly designed as strategic moving link for micromobility users and pedestrians, and it could improve the connection between Ali Pali and Wood Green Town Centre. The second site is in the area around the Mall Wood Green, including High Road, the little and invisible path between Library and Caxton Road. The Caxton Road is a daily route used by the residents behind High Street and those who come from West Haringey. And it is good thing that there is a cycle track on one side of the road, but still can see the incoherence of the lane, and there is often a worry about encountering a car in the street, because on the right side of the street is a parking lot of the mall. The idea is to design this street as a one-way car lane, parking bay on one side, expand pedestrian space on both sides, and transform part of the motor lane into cycle one. At the same time, the street is used to extend the depth of High Street Place function and increase the space for daily activities for residents. This path used to be a railway line in history, but after the railway was demolished, the big box shopping mall was set there. There was no enough consideration of the connection between High Street and the residential area behind it. Therefore, the design is to transform part of the parking lot into public space, demolishing a building as an extension of square in front of the library, improving the visibility of the entrance, and also improving the function of the place. The main issue on the High Street is no reliable cycle lane for people to use. The situation is that bicycles are mixed with cars in this area, but during the site filming, I found that people would rather ride on the sidewalk or push the bicycle to walk than use the motor lane. High Road is both an important public space and a movement route. The street has made a suitable design for the width of the sidewalk, but the micromobility consideration is missing. So the street interface encourages more micromobility users by adding bicycle lanes to reduce car use. The design is based on improvements in the micromobility movement function firstly, then followed by a reallocating of the street space to enhance the place function. As for the shaping of place, it is also important to transform the back streets into part of the public spaces. The third one is Woodside Ave, located in north of Highgate Wood, which has 3 schools and residential areas. The road serves as main commute route for students to and from school, and residents will use the road to get to the Muswell Hill Town Centre. This T-junction is one of the entrances to Tetherdown Primary School. In this area, adding sidewalk in the design to ensure the safety of students and pedestrians. There will also be more space for children to move and play. Close to the residential area, most of the street spaces are occupied by parking on both sides. There's no reliable cycleway and there's no extra space for students and residents to do activities. So the design is to increase the bicycle lane, change the original two-way double lane to two-way single lane. And the bulb pavement spaces on the street will be used for playing and socializing. Woodside Ave is both a street that connects the main roads on both sides. It has an important movement function. The design encourages micromobility, and perhaps it could also be used as an important place due to the needs of the urban rail. If we take micromobility as a starting point and prioritize the improvement of roads in the planned network, these streets will gradually be returned to people, and after these roads are transformed, more roads will be improved and people will have more public space.
Thank you.
As we know, the impact of car urbanism
Thank you.
Have now time for questions or comments. I don't know if Ed or anyone from the call wants to start.
Thank you so much for your presentation. It was really great to. It's my first presentation of 2022, so it's great to see familiar places and also very clear rationale for the development of the proposal. I think that your work sits in a huge amount of, I say, conversations, but also proposals in different cities around the world that are attempting to improve space, access for bicycles, for scooters, while also reducing the dominance of cars. And I can't remember if it was yesterday or this morning, Sadiq Khan was raising concern that there was increased numbers of traffic now in London because people are avoiding public transport, they're cycling less, that type of thing. So I think that the project is really, it's got great significance, I think. One of the big questions I often find in such projects is how do we, how do these types of projects, which take up a lot of space, you highlighted that I think 80% of the public space of somewhere like London is roadway. How do we use such transformations to create a sort of an architectural, spatial culture in the city? How do we create drama with such projects? And we see the cycle paths painted blue or painted green, but have you thought about how the identity of London can be transformed through your design, as well as through the increased numbers of people cycling and scooting?
Yeah, so I mean, if we use use the micromobility as the starting point, and if people get back their streets and how we use the street. So
can you speak close to the microphone? Sorry.
Yeah, I can hear me. So, so as I understand, your question is if we have the streets, how can we use it? So I think this is a very random thing because if we don't see, if we have the street, so firstly we have to have the street. So after that we can think about how we can use it. So it's a very random thing for me as for now. Yeah.
So just, but as far as your design, as far as the physical design, are there particular typologies, materials, scales that you think can make your intervention very different than what happens at the moment with painting the roadway blue?
Yeah, I think it's like painting something on the ground, just it's very start process because people need to the designer want to make this area this one is used for something, and So it's like a very first point, but we need to think in the future. So firstly, use this green painting, something like that, to take back to their street. So it's like, I want this area. So it's like people's minds. I want this area. So first is the first thing, and the second one is to this action will reduce some of the use of cars, and then people will randomly use these streets more in a more different functions. Yeah.
So you're saying that what we've seen today is just the first step, and perhaps what it is suggesting is something like how then you can make it different, no, from other interventions, no? Because I mean it's true that this is something that's happening in many places, no, not only in cities, also in schools of architectures and everywhere. There's a lot of proposals, no, that goes along the lines of, well, let's encourage, let's create these spaces, but many of them looks and feel, very similar, no? Like there's always or similar strategies, no? And it seems to be that, well, we can all, as you said, appropriate the space by this kind of tactics, no? Like painting the bicycle lanes, perhaps expanding a little bit the space, but how then you can make them part of, the local borough, in your case, Haringey, That might be an important question, no? Because perhaps this is like a metaphorical barrier, let's say, of these projects, no? That they end up being always looking, there's a cycle lane, there's more vegetation here and there, there's wider pavements, and that could happen in many places, no? Perhaps it's something that one can think of, how this can expand, or how this can not expand, like, be part of, certain location, culture, people, perhaps on your trips, in your bicycle over there, it's something that you can start to realize. Perhaps more difficult for you, not being a neighbor, let's say, literally on that place, but also, start thinking about how this could actually be implemented, depending on the location where it is.
I mean, I think that your project is already doing some of this. I have to say, I think there's certain moments where I think that at the intersections, expanding the sidewalk, that you're creating spaces which are, I think, give presence and identity to a network of lines. And I think that if we look at other movement systems, railways, for example, the drama of the railway as an architectural project is usually the stations, the plazas, the points of arrival. And I think there is potential in what you've shown, in actually where the mobility is slowing down, that actually that there are places that are larger, they're expanded out, we're meeting places. And I think your project is already showing us this, but I think I'm interested in, let's say, you making a claim for it.
Yeah. Thank you.
Hi, can you hear me? Can I ask a question?
Yep.
Yeah. Could you expand on the idea of the micro observation, which is very, I think, very interesting, and it actually makes your project, this attention to details, what works, what needs to be improved. And then you have surgical demolitions. So how micro and how not micro are these? And then there's also maybe the micro moving of certain members of the public, people who walk very slowly, people who are carrying the shopping, people who need to stop often on the route, which is not the interchange points in the network, but really the consideration of, let's say, dilation of time. Can you talk a bit about this different aspects of micro in your research? Thank you.
Yeah. So you mean like different aspects about the micromobility and how it brings the benefits to people. So, sorry.
Yeah, perhaps get closer to the.
Yeah, the micro as small. Small can be, you have applied it to many different things, to the scale of observation, to the size of the demolitions, to the speed or slowness of certain movements. So I think it's very important in your project. It informs it in different ways. Can you explain how you came to that, to the point of even the signage or the lack of signage, the fact that these things need to become visible, and maybe it doesn't need to be a gigantic sign, maybe there's a form of invitation. I think this is a value of, I don't see you anymore, but I hope I'm talking to you. There's a very sensitive approach to this, which transpires from the project. Can you explain a bit how you came to this, maybe in conversation with the group in the first stage of the project, and how this becomes a sort of a key to access your project, not just micromobility, many other things?
Yeah. So my understanding is like the micro one is like it can slow down people's daily life sometimes, and it will like especially for the street life, people will have some more where I can say slower life rhythm in some of the streets. And to make those streets become a place, it's not just about the moving, it's not just about the movement thing. So it's more about everything like we can do in the micro scale. So if we see the current situation is if people just we are driving, always driving, and we want to do something and to want to get to somewhere, we just drive, and to shop, we will shop in a very big box mall. So this will it will be convenient for the far distance, but we have to think if we were using the surrounding areas just for us, if we want to use this area near me, so maybe the micro mobility or micro thing will be better for me, I think.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, Yufan. If I might step in now. Yeah, I was really fascinated by the presentation, and I think Teresa used the word surgical, which is kind of spot on, because I think I for some reason when I read Alfredo's description of the project and coming into this blindly, I thought the proposal was going to be to say that there should be no more cars in Haringey at all in the borough, and it was this incredibly radical proposal. But actually, what you presented was a really kind of intelligent and surgical strategy, and it was also quite odd because I was doing a project with space syntax over the last few months, but at a completely different scale out in the Middle East, and then to see your sort of micro interventions working in the Haringey borough where I sit right now, it was kind of painfully walked up Wood Green High Street many a time. It's a pretty awful place. I think the whole thing needs to be kind of erased and started again. But I thought your proposals were very sensitive and really well tuned. And I guess from my my understanding of their processes about mobility and connecting these things, I wondered what it's sort of leading on from Ed's point as well. I'm interested in what you might demonstrate in your in your kind of surgical micro interventions that then might sort of catalyze and expand over the rest of the network. Whether that is about kind of creating an identity or a system of infrastructures or points of interest, places to stop, or how you might demonstrate a new kind of, logistic technologies or things like that. And maybe, I guess following on from that, is there opportunity to, where do you see this network in 100 years time or something, or what is there scope in this project to speculate on how mobility methods will change in 100 years time, and is the system that you're setting out now flexible to adapt to those things? There's sort of two questions in there, but I don't know if that's understandable.
Yeah, thank you. So my understanding is so you're talking about the scenario for this like network improvement, and I think the scenario is like it's just a very common thing. If it has just happened near you, it's just illustrated by in this network drawing. So the scenario could be, as my understanding is, the scenario could be seen in your life. It's just not, but just not for the some drawing, like to show this area could be better. So it's so the question still could be like how people use the streets in the future. If we take back the streets from the cars. So for me, for now, it's very random thing. So I cannot imagine how people can use this area if I don't understand this area, if I not this their neighbor. So it will be a very specific thing. So yeah. So if I understand your question clearly.
Yeah, I think guess your project really intelligently deals with the problems that the existing network presents in a very kind of intelligent way. But all these kind of problems that stem from years of like either poor development and planning and things like that. And I just wondered, is there a commentary about the future of this area that your project might want to make in terms of its transport networks, or thinking many years ahead? It's a kind of open question, I think.
Yeah. So actually, I don't really haven't think about this. Yeah. So yeah. Sorry. So yeah, it's a good question. But I haven't think about this.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I think Ed has pointed out to a very good point before about what he mentioned about the drama of the interventions, and also Alfredo was talking about how to make them look more specific. I think it's quite important that not only you solve a particular infrastructure problem, but you try to speculate how that catalog of interventions fabricates or pushes the way in which we see the city. Like when you think about Barcelona, the minute they did cut the chamfers to allow, I think it was the railway, or not the railway, but the trams with a certain radius to be able to cut around or whatever, they fabricated a particular space that then gets used for certain parking, certain activities. It has further connotations that only come apparent with time, but the visualization of these, visualizing these policies, playing with those visualizations, trying to make us imagine how the city is going to look like different and be inhabited differently, is something that architects are in a good position to do. So basically that drama, that how is the city going to be experienced in the future, beyond the fact that we solve particular problems or particular conflicts between pedestrians, vehicles, of different types? Is this how is the character of the city? How is our perception of our space going to be changing? And that's why you have to be more speculative in that sense. And perhaps that maybe you need some more, or not you now, because you are already delivering the project, but that's a very relevant question, no? Like how these visualizations can help us push our imagination of a city where these technical problems are being implemented all across, no? So what are the, beyond the eyesight visualizations that explain clearly what they are, is this other level? What I would imagine that's what Ed meant with the drama, no? Like how is that pushing us to actually conceptualize different our cities? And that's why visualization is so important, because at the end of the day, it's partially that imagination. And I think it's important to keep that in mind. But I mean, otherwise, good job.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I think it's all very interesting comments, especially based on what you will be. I mean, what you were describing, the micro kind of conceptualization of, let's say, of the mobility, which could lead to perhaps looking at how to make it more specific, like you were saying that, like you were interested in that because if you slow down the movement, if you make people more relatable to the spaces, then they will appropriate them and perhaps make them more specific, which is something that perhaps as an objective is part of the project or can be part of a more ambitious one. But also I think what John says, like, well, how these small interventions or surgical interventions could lead to perhaps larger changes or perhaps even more radical ones. At the moment, your project is, specifically selecting spots, some routes that are hidden or not really visible, and you think, well, your design could allow that to happen, but perhaps what would be what could happen to these small interventions if they are more systematized in the whole neighborhood, for example, and create a more radical change where there's more a different way of moving around the city, beyond the cars, like at the moment, well, you choose this micro path, and perhaps that's something to start with, but then you can think about how this can be used to speculate for the future, so people can actually imagine how this is something feasible, that could happen. I mean, I think it's thank you very much, Yufan.
Yeah, thank you.
And well, let's continue with the next project. Yuton will be the next one. She's online. I think you can share your video. Let us know if you need any help.
Community of students in the MSc stage, and this month I did some further individual research in the MArch stage. Our project is about create wealth for local impression by retrofitting houses in some way in order to improve their housing energy performance. Just trying to find what we can do in this like climate crisis and economic crisis. So now I'll
Construction waste accounts for 2/3 of the 200,000 tons of waste generated in the UK each year. Because of this waste of resources, the construction industry is responsible for 10% of the UK's yearly carbon emissions. Meanwhile, a large amount of construction
Yeah, it's quite pixelated from what I can see.
Yeah.
And we can hear it well, but it's really even more pixelated than the previous one.
share again.
Yeah, that's much
Construction waste
better.
accounts for 2/3 of
Much
the
better.
200,000 tons of waste
Hi, Yuton.
generated in the UK each year. Because of this waste of resources, the construction industry is responsible for 10% of the UK's yearly carbon emissions. Meanwhile, a large amount of construction materials has not been recycled, exacerbating the waste situation. Many innovative retrofit approaches have emerged, suggested to reuse what we already have. Retrofitting campaign is one example. Practices are underway. They explore how to reuse building materials and calculate carbon emissions by comparing materials' embodied energy. However, it's not enough. What about the affordability for people to choose expensive recycled materials to retrofit instead of demolishing and rebuilding? Since last September, electricity prices have been at their highest since the market was formed, and gas prices are similar. Because of the colder winter, irregular power plant maintenance during the COVID-19 pandemic, and low winds, less renewable energy was generated. Those events led to an exacerbation of the fuel poverty problem. Fuel inequality is particularly serious in the northwest of the UK, where the energy produced was transported to other regions, resulting in excessive bills for locals.
The video is very pixelated.
12.1% of
Can we can try, Eduardo is downloading the video from his computer. Perhaps we can share the video instead of you, because your connection is very bad. Is that okay?
Oh, I'm sorry.
Eduardo, are you?
Yeah, I'm doing that. Give me a minute. Yutong, how big is the video?
It's about 200.
How many?
200. About.
200?
Yeah.
Okay, I have it here. So give me a minute. Let me close everything so that I don't end up sharing whatever shows up. And then I open the video. And then I go to Zoom and I have to share. What do I share? Are you seeing something? Are you seeing my video?
Yes, and it's clear now.
Let's see if I can. Let's see if you hear the voice, okay? Do you hear the voice?
Sorry, we can't hear that.
Did you hear the voice?
No, not on my end.
You keep not. You couldn't hear it, right?
No.
Okay, let me see if I'm doing something wrong, as in, I don't know, you are screen sharing. Oh, no.
Construction waste accounts for 2/3 of the 200,000 tons of waste generated in the UK each year. Because of this waste of resources, the construction industry is responsible for 10% of the UK's yearly carbon emissions. Meanwhile, a large amount of construction materials has not been recycled, exacerbating the waste situation. Many innovative retrofit approaches have emerged, suggested to reuse what we already have. Retro-first campaign is one example. Practices are underway. They explore how to reuse building materials and calculate carbon emissions by comparing materials' embodied energy. However, it's not enough. What about the affordability for people to choose expensive recycled materials to retrofit instead of demolishing and rebuilding? Since last September, electricity prices have been at their highest since the market was formed, and gas prices are similar. Because of the colder winter, irregular power plant maintenance during the COVID-19 pandemic, and low winds, less renewable energy was generated. Those events led to an exacerbation of the fuel poverty problem. Fuel inequality is particularly serious in the northwest of the UK, where the energy produced was transported to other regions, resulting in excessive bills for locals. 12.1% of them live in fuel poverty prior to 1990, rising to 15.2% in 2010. As the main energy source has shifted from coal to gas and renewables, and ownership has shifted from government to privatized sectors, this hasn't been addressed. To address fuel poverty, one approach is to create wealth for locals, creating local jobs. Another is to improve the energy efficiency of houses to reduce the bills. Community wealth building is a tried and true strategy. It is people-centered for local economic development. We take inspiration from the famous Preston model, which is the cooperation of local anchor institutions and adopting progressive procurement policies to redirect wealth to the local community. How has the local cooperation been done? Wealth needs to be created and shared by local stakeholders rather than distant companies. Stakeholders here refer to local dwellers, local councils, and local building professionals. Local dwellers face fuel poverty, high energy bills, but wages are low. The housing is aged and the thermal comfort is low. Local councils need to guarantee a decent living for local dwellers while supporting local businesses. Local building professionals face shrinking job prospects, exacerbated by global competition. By engaging the three perspectives, we aim to reverse the fuel poverty issue in Preston through a community wealth building model for the retrofitting industry. 3 community scenarios were created to show the scheme led by 3 types of anchor institutions: city councils, universities, and energy suppliers. although the cost for renewable energy and reusable construction material with better performance is high. Through financial expenditure subsidies, future costs will be lower than current ordinary costs. Then, which area should be retrofitted first? The local council should make this decision during the planning stage. They need support to assess the situation of the residential buildings and dialogue with local dwellers and building professionals. In order to rationalize the allocation of the limited budget, we've created a multi-objective decision-making tool to involve local councils and dwellers in decisions on retrofitting policies. Take a social rental house, which is the most critical aspect in Preston, as an example. It accounts for 21% and the energy efficiency is low. The council could find that the retrofitting priority of this municipality is third of 6th, and the housing condition score could be upgraded to the 2nd of 6th. When the dwellers approach the council, they could be encouraged to retrofit and get financial support. The housing condition criteria mainly evaluates the energy performance and building age. The retrofitting affordability criteria represents the ability to implement the waste-to-wealth retrofitting scheme, including the sub-criteria of government incentives that can be actually accepted, the number of employments, the available recycled materials, and infrastructures. This multi-criteria objective decision-making tool evaluates the housing conditions and affordability. If the waste-to-wealth scheme is not implemented, it will pose a serious threat to the environment in 2050. This tool visualizes the areas with urgency and potential to prioritize interventions, highlighting the cost and benefits for each municipality. Local councils, dwellers, and other stakeholders could be engaged in our website. In Phase 1, 929 buildings, which are mainly social rental houses, could be retrofitted first, with partially subsidized by the council. In Phase 2, the procurement policies would be implemented through larger regions and extended to other types of housing with smoother cooperation, generating related jobs for building professionals. In Phase 3, the housing conditions could be widely improved, including their energy performance. Only regular maintenance services would be needed. By 2050, the total carbon emissions from the building industry could be reduced. This decision-making tool has the flexibility to adapt the databases and the parameters to the context of similar cities. Both policymakers and dwellers can discuss the retrofitting potential together. When discussing an individual project, a quantitative tool of embodied energy measurement is crucial for professionals and dwellers. The construction industry has developed numerous certifications, processes, standards, and qualifications for assessing the value of a material based on an environmental standard, but rarely are they regarding the value of humans producing or obtaining it. The life cycle analysis tries to trace the environmental consequences of a specific raw material from its inputs, outputs, and environmental impacts. Rather than focusing on a particular material, LEED evaluates a complete construction project. They analyze important criteria such as water efficiency, energy consumption, etc., assign a scoring scale. But still, something is missing. When architects talk about embodied energy, very rarely are they talking about actual bodies. Where is the labor behind? I try to make a new embodied energy assessment tool, measuring not only material energy but also social aspects. It is based on a database of 3 main architectural elements: floor, wall, and roof, measuring the initial embodied energy for construction, recurrent energy for renovations and maintenance, and operational energy use. Solid floor makes up 51.1% of Preston residential flooring, if it requires minimal operational energy. The best option should be concrete slab on ground with carpet, but energy consumption during retrofitting is high, so the waffled and polished one might be the best convention. Professionals and dwellers could compare and discuss which installation is better by using this tool. Meanwhile, 7 variables in the social aspects conclude demographic assessment, quality of life performance, distributional equity, environmental justice, civic engagement, required labor and just labor, to measure the amount and the type of work it requires and whether they are well paid and treated fairly. In the user interface, the technical steps of retrofitting are shown. In addition to energy demands and social concerns, the dashboard shows the cost through the waste-to-well scheme, the tax exemptions, and the energy bills saved in the future. Material researchers, manufacturing contractors, and designers can share their datasets on the platform. For the community, waste-to-wells is an approach to retrofitting. Here, retrofitting is not just a literal one, but a retrofitting of two systems, the construction industry and the local Lancashire textile industry. In the traditional construction industry, typical housing carbon emissions run through the entire process from the extracting and manufacturing of raw materials to the operation of the house and eventually to landfills. The best node to intervene in reducing carbon emissions is to reduce the operational energy of the buildings that accounts for the largest share of the total. Maintaining floors, walls, and roofs requires a balance between energy saving and cost. We found that 77.4% of the present roofs are pitched terracotta tile roofs with timber frames. Replacing the terracotta tiles with concrete tiles could be the best conventional solution. Cavity brick walls, which account for 80.5% of the total, can also be repaired as modified reverse brick veneer walls with timber frames. Assuming that this typical house is maintained with the best conventional practices, the local construction industry's carbon emissions could be significantly reduced. Lancashire, including Preston, has a long textile industry history. There were two turning points. In 1853, due to booming commerce, it earned the title of Cottonopolis. In 1945, the need for cotton uniforms during World War II caused a second explosion. Can the textile industry revive? Fiberglass as a building insulation material, the process of raw material extraction, production, transportation, application, and recycling can be connected with the local textile industry. The machines producing it and textile are so similar that they only need to add pre-batch processing machines, melting machines, and also associated labor like elementary, sales and customer services, and operatives, which match the previous experience of the unemployed. With the existing infrastructure, the textile industry could be transformed into the production of fiberglass. Thus, the future local textile industry has the potential for a third turning point. Although the usage of a fair trade mark is becoming increasingly acceptable in many sectors, labor seems to be invisible in architecture. As sustainability quickly becomes a top priority for designers, it must evolve into a more comprehensive metric. Our goal is to make this model easy to understand, visible and touchable to policymakers, professionals, and ordinary people.
Thanks, Yuton.
Thank you. Sorry about that connection.
Okay, so the floor is now open for our jurors.
I'll kick off, Eduardo, if you can hear me. Yutong, thank you for the sharing the video. I have to say, the first 5 minutes was a little bit fuzzy, so I didn't see all the great images that you prepared. But I think that the narrative is very clear. Your description, your ambition for the project. I think that it touches on what I think are probably some of the most important issues in architectural design of buildings. At the moment, I think we see projects which are more craft-based. We see the larger industrial processes also engaging with waste and reuse. And I think that's the approach you've taken around energy and sort of looking at the life cycle of materials is extremely logical. I understand why you've done it. I think it makes a lot of sense. I think it's also great that you've identified elements that are missing from some of these conversations. You talk about the missing bodies. And I think that using that as a lever to sort of open up conversations around the social side of building, the use, the imbalances of power, the lack of resources that some people have versus the excessive resources that others have, I think is extremely important. I think that there's always this kind of tension, I think, in projects between the very logical sort of closed cycle of energy and these uneven elements which kind of disrupt our logical thinking. I think that all of our projects could recognize these tensions more, I think. I think one of maybe a question for you to open things up. I'd be interested to know from you what potential new vernaculars could begin to emerge from this type of architectural approach. I think that many of us in the UK, we can look to the work of Assemble up in Liverpool several years ago, so developing a very particular aesthetic, a very particular style by retrofitting, reusing, and I think probably it has historical references, quite craft-based. But I was wondering what the vernacular that you're imagining could come out of the project that you presented to us.
I think in the MSc stage, we developed some research about how we use the wasted and recycled material to retrofit. But this term, I did some research about new materials like fiberglass. That's what we need to use. We must add some new material to the construction. And I think the tools I developed has some variables, and when the person is a old city with textile industry, but there are some other similar cities with declined others industry. When it comes to other cities, we could change some of the parameters, make it suitable for other communities. Did that answer your question? Sorry, I can't hear the sound.
Yeah, no, it's fine. We hear more or less what your answer. But I think, I mean, for me, it's also crucial not to understand what this approach will lead into the implementation of architecture, no? Because basically your project is trying to basically explain that there should be a more comprehensive way, no, to understand and measure the way we build, no, or the impact the construction has in the environment, no, and that a lot of the certificates or measurements are all, looking at the physical aspect, no, and if we start looking at the social aspects, or we start looking at, how some of the materials are sourced locally, therefore you will have a kind of impact, no, into the way those buildings of that locality would look like, no. You wouldn't be able to get, you will get certain differences just by promoting local companies or local type of materials, and that obviously combined with physical aspect, weather, location, etc., then it would lead to what it's calling, I guess, vernacular. No, like, well, all this combined will have an impact, no, in the types of architecture, styles of architecture. Just because you start understanding the impact, no, on that, and I think it's something that perhaps you need to make sure that it's clear, no, the message, no, like, so there is an important job, no, in I guess laying down the foundation of how we understand the impact of the way we build today, and that impact is not only environmental, but also it will be in the type of building, whether new or whether retrofit or whether with reduced material, no, and it's something that you could try and explain or incorporate with more clarity, I guess, no, into your thesis.
May I, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Well, first of all, congratulations. It's very difficult to be critical about something I think I'll be mostly enthusiastic about. I think the video is strong in many ways, because I think an important element of this project is its communication. If this lands nowhere, it has no purpose. So implicitly, I think it addresses its wanted audience. To give, I understood, I don't know if I'm right, that the ones who need retrofitting is us. So we can retrofit buildings, cities, environments if we change ways of thinking and operating. And then of course you tell us how this can be done in a specific situation. Then what the built environment will look like will be, yes, a transformation of the given, but also the specificity, which I think is probably what Ed was referring to, which stays with the specificity of the place and of the history of production on site, and availability of materials, of course. But I see this as something which can be easily transferred to other realities, although it will look completely different. I think this is part of me congratulating you. In terms of communication, then maybe this emphasis of let's redesign, retrofit rather, how we think and work would involve not only developers, builders, but the very education system, education training, retraining of people who work in the sector. And the sector is very wide, because you went into textiles to bring it to construction industry. So I think, just to echo what Alfredo was saying, then maybe that could be communicated a bit more in your video. We see machines, and we see the fibers being woven. If that's probably the wrong term, but maybe because you're ultimately talking about people, maybe we need to see a bit more people. But well, thank you. I think for me it was a good lesson. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, I'll step in. I think agreeing with the other critics, is a really topical and really important field, and I think the project was, yeah, I think it's great, and I think the way it was presented on the video was kind of beautiful, and I think it's really, yeah, really powerful and generates a lot of kind of ideas. I mean, I've got I had like a few kind of, or far too many kind of like process-based questions, like about which are kind of like I'm just speculating on the ideas of how you build the data around selected properties and how those databases can feed into your system. And at the moment, I guess it relies on kind of public data about building ages and things like that. And I wonder, is there scope to add other tools for identifying low performance buildings potentially? And is that a particular avenue that might be interesting if it was to expand into other cities? The other one, I suppose, is that I'm just kind of remarking on is you see that there's a new kind of metrics that you're developing, which incorporates a kind of, well, the labour metrics and social metrics. And I wondered, is there, in developing that, did you find a correlation between carbon emissions and, I guess, of materials, and then the kind of the social impact metric that you've developed? Does that shine a spotlight on a particular construction material? I mean, you can kind of imagine ones from particular places around the world or through particular shipping methods, but it's just an interesting question. I wondered whether your research might, because this to my mind, hasn't kind of been done before, so it feels quite important. It feels like it's something that could be looked at. There was another one. Another remark I had was that you've kind of created like an entire analysis tool from scratch. And I know that there's research projects. I think at Hawkins Brown is one of them, where they're trying to create tools for like existing softwares, whether it might be kind of a BIM or Revit in the form of plugins, which give you kind of a live feed of carbon emissions as you're selecting materials. But it feels like this new metric that you developed could also become a plugin to be used on existing software, which is kind of quite interesting, I think. And following on from Ed's provocation about what would a new vernacular look like based on, with these tools and this approach. And I think that's a kind of really interesting thought. And I think if you're thinking about how you kind of, complete the project, or how you kind of showcase it through representation, I think it could be interesting to kind of speculate on what if not what an entire new building or architecture might look like, or at least even just the recycled materials themselves. And I think there's particularly what Assemble did, when they kind of, I think in that Liverpool project, they taught the residents how to create, I think it was fireplaces and trivets and things using the rubble of the demolished buildings. And they kind of changed the perception of recycled materials to, through craft, to become something that was really, they were kind of like arts objects. And I think there's a few examples of other companies like Smile Plastics and things like that use ocean plastics. And I think there's like a kind of material perception thing that could, conclude some of your research maybe, or some examples of what these things kind of look like in a tactile way. But I think it's, that's kind of 4 sort of unanswerable questions, but comments on a kind of on a really great project and potential ways to take them forward. But thank you.
Thank you. I think the data set I used in the tool for the council is mainly based on the statistic data, and the tool for the embodied energy assessment tool for the dwellers and the building professionals, architects, is based on some existing embodied energy data set. There are many fabulous material experts and architects develop them, and there are many similar data sets here. And what I did here, what's the difference I did is, the first is I consider the labor behind. Second is, all of these embodied energy tool, the data set is too complex. When I reading it, it's difficult to understand even me, or it's difficult to understand by like residents or some architects, I think. And what I did is to make this understandable and they could see it a little bit more visually when discussing the retrofitting scheme.
Yeah, no, I think you've achieved that really well. I think it's fantastic. I was just speculating in my head like whether there was ways of using kind of like thermal imagery or just other techniques for kind of assessing building performances kind of through computation or machine learning and things like that, and whether that was a potential scope in the future, I guess.
Yeah. No. Well, thanks, Yutong. I mean, I also think that it's important, perhaps, to reflect on how these potential tools could actually lead to certain type of buildings or to certain type of environments, and for that, it's quite important, not to release the imagination, no, of what this type of measurements would lead to, no, even though perhaps there will be different ones, no. But just that sort of speculation or visualization of, if you take into account these aspects in measuring, the impact of the building, you may have this, type of environments, no? So I think it's something that is always crucial, no? And so perhaps something that you need to also, think about how this could be incorporated, no, in a project like this, no? So it's not necessarily only the measurements of certain metrics, no, but how this could actually lead to certain types of landscapes, buildings, no, infrastructures. In this case, housing, no. That's something that needs to be, I think, incorporated. But yeah, thank you very much, Yuton. I think we need to move on to the next team. So, thank you. Ivan, can we?
Shall I play it from here, or how do
Yeah.
So, hello, we are the 2 members team, and we start our project from this term to concentrate on decrease the conflict between renewable energy and biodiversity. And our project is located in Northumberland, which are in the northeast of England. And we also would implement our proposal to in the world wild. Yeah, so we can start the video.
Yeah, I'll play it in case sound doesn't go out. So I think I've done. Just let me know, but it should be okay.
Climate change is one of the most serious challenges in the world for the past decades of year in the future. Our world has already experienced unprecedented damages from climate change. Polar bears will disappear by 2100 if it keeps warming up, and the coral reefs are under threat. At the COP26 climate change submitted in 2021,
can you stop that one? We're going to run it from here. Sorry? No, Jifan is going to run it from the computer in lecture hall.
Yeah.
You couldn't hear it?
No. That we're going to run it from the computer in the lecture hall. If it doesn't work, then we can use yours. But let's do it from.
Climate change is one of the most serious challenges in the world for the past decades of year in the future. Our world has already experienced unprecedented damages from climate change. Polar bears will disappear by 2100 if it keeps warming up, and the coral reefs are under threat. At the COP26 climate change submitted in 2021, countries have set out plans to cut greenhouse gas emissions and secure global net zero by mid-century. It is imperative to accelerate the phase-out of fossil fuel and develop renewable energy. UK is the first major economy to pass net zero emission law to realize net zero by 2050. The CFD scheme is the government's primary method of encouraging investment in low-carbon electricity. The Round 4 project will spend a large amount of expense on offshore wind farm and an extra 24 million on floating offshore. Despite all the advantages that we know, what are the impacts of renewable energy? Is it as clean as we think? There are a lot of news and warnings by bird tractors that wind farm is seriously harmful for bird survival. Birds are under high risk of corrosion, disturbance, displacement, barrier effects, and direct habit loss. Every year, about 380,000 birds are killed by the wind turbines in US. The fishery industry is also being affected. We can see from the map that the higher density area is close to the existing wind farm. The sensitivity map shows the area of the Round 4 project is facing high sensitivity. On the one hand, developing renewable energy is crucial to prevent climate change, so to protect biodiversity. On the other hand, developing renewable energy will harm the biodiversity. Our proposal is to balance the conflict between biodiversity and renewable energy so as to prevent climate change, to protect our homeland. Bird is an exceptional indicator of the biodiversity, as the only species that can get everywhere of the world freely. Birds' population chain often mirrors those of other species. For example, the shortage of the sand eel results in a large amount of the decrease of seabirds which feed on it. The International Union for Conservation of Nature is the world's most comprehensive inventory of the world conservation status of biological species. Every one of 8 birds is threatened with extinction. The UK's coasts are home to some of the world's largest seabird colonies. Every year, over 7 million seabirds breed around the UK's coast. To protect the birds' conservation, the government developed a series of legislations, which are also implementing the Environment Impact Assessment by RSPB. The existing Environment Impact Assessment includes 5 steps to select the sites that are suitable for development. Due to the lack of bird data, the assessment cannot ensure the protection of the seabirds. So we add a procedure to supplement the lack of the birds' distribution data. Firstly, we would use technology to monitor a certain number of birds tracking route for at least 10 months. To decrease the risk of bird incidents, we use the food source tracking method to predict the birds' varied areas and the future change of the birds' distribution. To select the area of our project, we use a series of indicators and data in terms of sensitivities of birds and wind farm to implement multi-criteria map analysis. After we choose Northumberland as our research areas, we use the food source tracking method to choose the specific potential sites. According to the research of the gannets, it is mainly feed on the MODTD. So we choose phytoplankton as our object to do our dynamic tracking due to the food chain sample of gannets. We use the multi-criteria calculation method to construct EIA by selecting 3 elements that most affect phytoplankton distribution: chlorophyll A density, sea surface temperature change, and the amount of particulate organic carbon. Then we create the different situations in the 4 seasons in Northumberland in 2020 to simulate how our environmental impact assessment would be implemented. The 4 levels of buffer zones are created from the calculations above. From the result of the dynamic tracking, only Zone 3 and Zone 4 are suitable for wind farm development. Bryce is the center and pioneer of renewable energy in UK. A lot of organizations and companies are located in Bryce because of the development of renewable energy. Also, one of the CFD demonstration projects is located in Bryce and the first to install floating offshore. This makes Bryce the best testing area of our project.
Here we combine phytoplankton concentration and winter bilocation and capacity to build a smaller range of buffer maps and stimulate the potential movement of rows of birds to set up different types of protection devices. For phytoplankton concentration, we also analyze the 4 seasons of Blythe. At the same time, 3 levels of filtering were carried out according to their value. Next, we did research on current state of Blythe wind turbine and integrated into our database based on their capacity. Then we got buffer maps of 4 seasons of Blythe. Cyan is phytoplankton buffer line, and purple is the buffer line of the wind farm. Next, we generated potential movement routes by connecting birds' habitats and phytoplankton concentration points, and then determine whether they will pass through the sphere of influence of wind turbine. The above are all potential roads and the below are attractive main roads. Then a road density map for 4 seasons have been generated. After overlapping with the buffer zone maps, it was found that both spring, summer, and winter generating flight paths go through the wind farm. In response to current situation, we propose 5 main solutions. First is increasing concentration density and resting area. Second is offer resting area at south for seabirds. And third is using fishing checks to lead birds. The fourth is maximizing benefit of fishing in unit time. Last one is wind farm barrier to impede birds enter wind turbine areas and classify them by function division. First, in order to increase density of phytoplankton and rest area in the north, we arrange the devices within the second control of phytoplankton buffer. For further detailed localization, we construct the potential northern migration route of birds in a similar way as before. After analyzing their density, devices to attract birds and phytoplankton were placed facing the direction of birds' flight. And we used the same method in the summer. Later, it was found that there was a lack of phytoplankton concentration point in autumn and winter, so we reserved some spring and summer installation to attract phytoplankton in these 2 seasons. Then we deployed the devices in the south in a similar way to the north, in order to provide resting place for seabirds. Similarly, we have reserved some of devices at permanent deployment points. Next, after doing researches on the habitats of seabirds, the main constituent factor was extracted to join our design process. For example, artificial nesting, artificial wetland, fruit planting, etc. Finally, generated a scene application graph of devices. Next step, we replan the fishery, hoping to maximize the fishing benefit per unit time without destroying the phytoplankton living environment. Therefore, we set fishing area and devices in the fields outside the second control of plankton buffer zone and the 8th control of wind farm buffer. To maximize fishing benefits, we analyzed the moving tendency and their density of phytoplankton between seasons, allowing boats to have fishing operations in areas with high density of fishes. We're using floating sites as a reference to guide the ship navigation, adding elements that attract phytoplankton and fish on the sites, such as planting seaweed, to increase fishing results of fishing boats when passing. Finally, we analyzed the current status of birds' moving pace, their density, and deployed protection devices in the wind farm buffer zone facing their flight directions. This deviates the flight pace of birds and avoids that they fly into the area of the wind farm. In addition, we added a new type of birds protection wind turbine to the barrier devices and painted the devices purple to disperse birds. At the same time, we dye one of the blades of existing wind turbine black to increase the visual sensitivity of birds to the turbines. Next is a summary of Blythe's area design. We simulated 4 stages of floating islands, changes over time. They will follow the principle of natural selection, some disappear and some combine. Finally, the man-made island that is the most suitable for the area will be generated. After completing the basic design of Blythe, we jump to a larger scale and implement this system, expecting to reduce conflict between birds and wind farm. So this is the analysis of phytoplankton concentration and wind farm situation in the 4 seasons of the UK scale. Similarly, we have generated 4 seasons of buffer zones. Next is the bird's flight pace simulation. We connected Gannet's hot point from 2010 to 2012 as a sample of this data. After overlapping with the buffer zone maps, the analysis diagram of wind farm barrier and floating islands in 4 seasons are constructed. Then use a seasonal increase and decrease of phytoplankton in units as before to create the most suitable area analysis and gather routes for fishing operation per unit time. Finally, we return to the world scale in order to maximize our design system. The first is still the analysis of phytoplankton concentration. Then a global buffer zone of 4 seasons was produced. Imported the world's top 8 birds migration routes as the basic data for the migratory routes simulation steps. The floating islands and wind barrier analysis diagrams are built after overlapping with the buffer zone maps. At last, data on increase and decrease of phytoplankton in units were added to guide the global fishery. To sum up, our target is not carry out of nostalgia to the beautiful past. With the passage of time, organisms have already begun to try to adapt to the development of human beings. The establishment of global EIA and biodiversity buffer zone represent that, under the diversified background of vigorously developing new technologies, can human beings start to learn to adapt and protect organisms? Thank you.
And Happy New Year!
Thank you. Thank you, Yifan and Cory. So let's see if there is any questions or comments from Zoom or from Ed over here.
I'll go first this time, if that's okay. Yeah, thank you very much for the presentation. It was it's an area I'm kind of super interested in, and I appreciate I really like the kind of process deduction you went through to kind of and steps you made to kind of determine these areas, using the data that you had available, which can't, isn't always an easy kind of process to go through. So and using kind of particular birds as examples. I think my overall question, I think again, down to kind of representation and detail at this stage is about the devices themselves and the design of those. And you've got a kind of a toolkit and catalogue of there's kind of phytoplankton release devices, and they're kind of floating island bird habitats. And I guess given the as you got onto the end, the potentially planetary scale deployment of these devices, I wondered, what were these things kind of made of, and what do they look like, and what does it mean for them to be distributed along our kind of coastlines? Because there's obviously a lot of, wind farms themselves kind of have a mixed kind of perception about whether they're a blight on visual, in terms of their visual impact. And I guess how could the design of your devices, where do they sit in that kind of conversation?
As I understanding, are you asking about like the material that we use to create our floating islands and the temporary device?
Yes, I think for me, I'm really interested in those as objects, how they're made materially, what do they look like, and their scale. And I guess it would be useful maybe if you could talk a bit about that. And is there a chance for you to kind of represent these things visually?
Yeah, actually, we have to think about this question, and we have to do some case study and research. And so there is some case that a president that used the marine recycled material to build such a device. So we are thinking, so that's also another recycle from the marine, to use the recycled material from the marine to develop our structure. Yeah, thank you.
I have a question. It's a very complex case. Maybe they're all complex, but the way you've also presented and visualized it, and the fact that there's the two of you, and then you've chosen three, let's say, ingredients of these. Environment. There are only three, but there's more. And you mentioned them. Let's say the turbines, the phytoplankton, the birds, but then of course there's the fishing, and there's many other things. So it's a very complex situation. And one question is the data, how you get them, how reliable are they, how many simplifications and selections you had to perform. But aside from that, what is interesting is that you go from, let's say, the by now old-fashioned idea of environmental impact assessment to management to what I would call seasonal management, which needs an ongoing engagement, let's say by you, and I don't know what to call you, whether you are the directors, the designers, which really takes me to what's the actual questions. Who are you? What are you in this process? Let's widen the term designer as one of the many actors in the process, which are, yes, the birds and maybe the municipality and maybe the fisheries and who knows how many others. What I find interesting here, but it emerges in other projects, but here is really crucial, is that you propose yourselves as, let's say, strategists, coordinators, or of this very complex scenario. And then you somehow return, we need to imagine here community meetings and probably massive arguments with different interest groups, who pays for what and who decides. And so I presume there you would be hosting and facilitating. And then at some point you become designers in the more conventional sense, which I think is probably related also to the question of what are these floating islands? Do you design them? Do you prepare prototypes? Do you facilitate or design these safe areas for the presence of birds? So behind this incredibly complex scenario you analyze, I think there's a critique or a questioning of your own role in the whole process, which is essential and crucial. And I just wanted you to know, to say something about this. I mean, how do you come to this? How do you see your future role, both as ambition and realistically in terms of your future practice, to propose these to environmental groups, to local communities, or to national agencies in reality, because you're looking in this case at the whole UK. It's a big question, but it's a big project you have presented. So I think it deserves to ask these questions. Sorry I know it's a mean question, but let's try to discuss it. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for your question. And
yeah, in this project, sorry, we just have some like some part of as a landscape designer, just like we want to improve some landscape that's around the wind farm or something, and at the same time we will add some do some research as a student to give some not very formal advice to some organism that's who is focused on the biodiversity or the birds. Just like the EIA we create is some like we give the suggestions to the government and to the animal protection organism, just like that. So.
I think you don't have to choose which role you want to occupy, but do you see yourselves acting as consultants at the wider scale? Sorry, this is more of a general question. I know it's a difficult one. I wouldn't want to answer it myself. You come out of this program now, and congratulations for that. Do you want to be the one who designs the sanctuary areas for the birds, or do you want to be the one who goes around the world to different governments saying we need to do this, and I can show you how? That's really the question in a nutshell.
Yeah, actually, because we two are all like urban designers, so as our the first proposal, we want to like have some very imagination design in our project as a designer, but as the large amount of the previous research, so we want to develop our project to recover the environment or to make our homeland better. And since the renewable energy, like the COP26 submitted, all the countries is gonna to realize net zero by the mid-century. So we want to have a very draft proposal to implement our design into the world. So, but not very mature, maybe.
Thank you. You're very diplomatic in your answer. I think you rightly brought up the COP26 because that's exactly the problem which emerged, the global needs for change, and then national and private interests or corporate interests which emerge and slow things down. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much for the presentation. I think that John touched on my sort of say both the praise for the project. I think there's some really fascinating issues that you raise and decisions that you make, really intelligent decisions you make. I particularly appreciated the rationale for how you settled on Northumberland as a place to further investigate and develop your proposals. And I think this move from the national scale down to a very particular location in the northeast of England, then out to the global scale, is also, it demonstrates your a particular way of thinking through landscape, which I appreciate very much. I think that I think that the accuracy of some of the data that you showed is really fascinating. I haven't seen maps of gannets flying over the North Sea in the way that you've shown, and I think that they point to the usefulness of these big bodies of data that you're using. So I think again, well done on that. I think it's, you develop a convincing argument for the project. I think the one area which intrigues me, I think, is, and it maybe it kind of breaks open some of sort of the logic and clarity of the project, a little bit like with the last project I mentioned, is that you're talking about a tension between the birds, the renewable energy, the fishery, and I suppose interested in, I suppose, many of the other contentions around wind farms. Wind farms, I think, as John mentioned, they are recognized to be problematic and for different reasons in different places. And I was wondering whether you've discussed how this type of model that you've developed may relate to some of those other tensions. So, for example, you are by painting some of the blades on the wind turbines, by creating these new islands, you may increase the visual quality of the wind farm, which would further create further tensions with people who would like to advance the landscape as a visual medium. And I recognize you said you're not nostalgic, and I also appreciate that very much. But I think that, have you had a discussion about these other tensions and how it was important to keep the project quite focused, but also it exists in this larger ecosystem of issues and concerns around renewable energy? You can say yes or no if you want, but
Can you repeat again the main questions?
Did you have any discussion between the two of you about how you focus the project, but also how there's many other issues around renewable energy that you could consider that you might have not brought into the project?
Yeah, we just use the wind farm as an example that we would like to focus on this renewable energy because it's represent just which is the most developed renewable energy all around the world. So it's a sample that we just focus our idea that's around the biodiversity between the biodiversity and the renewable energy. So maybe there are lots of other questions we do not focus on, but maybe just
because like renewable energy and biodiversity is both a very complex system, so we're thinking about to choose like two kinds of renewable energy and or more than one species to do our research, but it's all.
One of the very important questions, like, which I think it would be good in the future, for you or for the next cohort of students that deals with these projects, who is going to be carrying out this, and which organizations in a way should embrace which parts of the work. So even thinking about this scope is an extremely interesting question, and it comes out of the fact that you've presented it relatively well. But that would be, I would imagine, the next scoping question, which I think is quite interesting. But generally, yeah, I insist it's been good production, really. Good.
Okay, well, thank you very much. Let's move on to the last project by Marianne.
We'll run it from there, right?
Yeah, we'll do it from here. Hopefully it works better.
Hi, good afternoon. It is a pleasure to be presenting today in person. And
you might need to get just a bit closer to the mic.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
My name is Mariam, and I'm part of a team of working on land reform, but today I'm focusing more on exploring two future pathways in agriculture of the UK, and my project is called Cultivating the Future.
The personal responsible angle in mitigating climate change is overplayed. For systemic changes in agriculture, politics and economy, we need to influence people at the levers. We need politicians to change the laws and invest in innovation for the fields we don't have great solutions yet. What can we learn from current agroecology initiatives to convert them into policies? The UK faces an uncertain future related to changing subsidy regimes, corporate power, concentrated land ownership and increasingly high costs of inputs. Clearly change is required, a fact recognized by governments. To take measures to ensure sustainable development, it is necessary to understand the reasons for the current issues. The issue of land use and how it is owned and managed underlies a number of challenges. Tightly policed intellectual property rights, fossil fuel dependence, global trade agreements, the provision of massive agricultural subsidies.
The design thesis Cultivating the Future makes this point by exploring two future pathways for agriculture in the UK.
Today we hear and observe information about what the UK can look like in the future from the news articles and scientific publications.
How can designers employ the climate fiction narratives to build climate awareness and draw public attention to the relevance of agroecology?
The two scenarios are based on RCP. Each RCP is assigned a number that describes how the climate will fare in the year 2100. Generally, a higher RCP number describes a scarier fate. It means that humanity emitted more carbon dioxide into the atmosphere during the 21st century, further warming the planet and acidifying the ocean. The best case scenario is called RCP 2.6. The worst case is RCP 8.5.
The first scenario demonstrates how existing patterns of concentrated ownership and corporate power will drive an agricultural transition that reproduces existing inequalities and environmental injustice. The second scenario offers an alternative system pathway which is accompanied by social change, by the growing movement for agroecology, and calls for a redistribution of power.
All that you touch you change. All that you change changes you. The only lasting truth is change.
We identified 16 sample farms from various sustainable farming networks across England to act as anchor farms connecting with neighboring farmlands. By assessing size, environmental qualities, and demographic status, to understand current agroecology initiatives, we identified Willowbrook as the site with a high potential for successful and regenerative collaboration. The site's location between 7 existing farming clusters in Oxfordshire allows it to be connected to local clusters at a regional level. Willowbrook has already implemented sustainable practices, with a range of livestock and diverse farming practices, so it proposed as an anchor farm in the cluster. However, some of the neighboring farms continue to practice monocropping. As a cluster, they could incrementally transition the environmental condition at a greater scale. What is going to happen if we don't take appropriate action to mitigate climate change? The first vision heralds a future in which the dynamics that shape the current agriculture system are perpetuated. Agricultural production has long relied on a range of inputs produced using fossil fuels and containing chemicals which impact both biodiversity and public health. The protection provided by intellectual property has become an encouragement for companies to introduce and monetize existing innovations, whilst creating barriers of entry to smaller firms. Supply chains have been built in favor of international oligopolies, not food producers, citizens and local ecology. The arrival of such a scenario has been ensured through intellectual property regimes, global trade agreements and the provision of large-scale agricultural subsidies. The first scenario was influenced not only by scientific papers, but also by the science fiction novel, The Parable of the Sower, by Octavia Butler. The past and present links between the concentration of corporate power and social and environmental injustice around the world are well known. By 2050, continuing the same mistakes in the transformation of UK agriculture have already led to a sharp rise in food prices and increased dependence on imports produced to reduce social and environmental standards.
Hello, it's Friday, July 22nd, 2050, and it's been another extremely hot day across the UK. Widely today's temperatures exceeded 36 degrees Celsius, with temperatures from Southampton to Birmingham exceeding 40 degrees Celsius.
Young people are migrating to cities due to the lack of land for agriculture and education, which has already led to even more land being abandoned. The farmlands and towns continue to have a divided ownership status. A narrow focus on researching and developing capital-intensive farming machinery has further increased input costs and farmer debt, worsening the already perilous productivity treadmill which food producers face. In conjunction with existing trends and changes to the subsidy regime in the UK, this has led to a deterioration of the already shocking levels of land ownership concentration across the UK by driving smaller producers out of business. Rainier winters mean a higher risk of flooding from overflowing rivers, saturated ground, overwhelmed drains and battered coastlines. In a high-emission scenario, dairy cattle spend a month a year under heat stress, which has already led to a reduction in milk production and made them more vulnerable to diseases. The harvest of crops such as potatoes has also already begun to fail. In 2050, where a cascade of ecological crises has impoverished the world, pollinating insects have all but disappeared. Soil erosion in the UK has increased by 13 to 22.5%. Scientists from the European Commission say,
Soil erosion, when water or wind removes soil particles, has also accelerated because of land use changes and crop rotation.
So how does the possible farming change in the worst future scenario? The only arable farming possible in the future scenario, in walled patches or drone surveyed, hands-free hectare. A notable test farm in Shropshire working on autonomous farming, counts Bayer, the world's largest suppliers of seeds and pesticides, and Yara, a global giant in fertilizer production, among its sponsors. But what if we do take appropriate action to mitigate climate change? Another vision of agricultural transformation, however, recognizes the need for agricultural change to be accompanied by social change. Instead of a global agri-food system characterized by competition, consolidation, and dispossession, it calls for an agricultural future rooted in cooperation, diversity and commoning. Policies that were proposed in MSc thesis had impact on the RCP 2.6 strategy, which support transition from connection to commons. As the thesis suggests, the plan will be divided in 3 years with the steps for each of them. Year 3 is about connection and transition, which links with 3 MSc steps. Year 6 works on the network, supporting transition via connection, cluster and commons. The last step in March thesis, Year 9, is about the common facilities and links only with commons in MSc thesis. We identified a number of actions and grants the potential farmer cluster can receive. The first stage involves seeking funding, identifying an anchor or leader farm, and forming a cluster. At that stage, forming a cluster will allow small farmers to pool resources and undertake environmental projects collaboratively, whereas an independent project would require more money and labor. In the next stage, the cluster should begin to consider more resilient strategies, including sharing land for rotational grazing and cropping, and sharing machinery. In the third stage, farmers, using the existing cluster as the organizational structure, can transfer their land holdings into a common trust in which all member farms hold shares as trustees. This is beneficial for undertaking cluster-wide strategies, such as the expansion of pollinator corridors and rotational croppings. We propose an app to share knowledge and facilitate decision-making for farmers, letting know about the benefits and guiding them specific support they might need. The app would take as an input the user's drawing of crop margins and trees, and then generate an image. The alternative pathway, accompanied by social change and the growing movement for agroecology, will take place gradually, according to plan. Today, the farmlands in the Willowbrook area have a divided ownership status, with the average farm size significantly below the national average. In the transition towards sustainability, the existing green corridors were taken into account. By the end of the 3-year practice in the Willowbrook cluster, internal roads and farming facilities will be improved, road communication with the towns around the cluster will be established and nature inside the farms will be restored. Environmental corridors such as beetle banks are installed to partition large crop fields, to allow insects to inhabit the strip. Biological pest control. It is a strip planted with grasses. However, a hedgerow is a line of closely spaced shrubs and sometimes trees. Hedgerows are an extremely valuable habitat for wildlife as well as providing a natural barrier or boundary.
Beetle travels from bank into the field. Its predator comes into the field and their interference is good for the wheat's growth. Typically, sustainable practices dedicate 5% of pocket spaces to nature. Aladdin is on 15 to 20%, with hedges, shrubs, beetle banks, and wildflower corridors.
During the transition in the year 3, benefits will rise after the second year. At the same time, it is clear that labor will be required mostly in the first year, while expenses will take place only in the first 6 months of the transition. After the transition, the farm cluster will be already more open to the public, with a much improved nature restoration inside it. At the same time, the existing green organizations in Kydlington will want together with the cluster, opening the way for the potential further improvement for new entrants. Land is required for new entrants to the sector looking to farm agroecologically. The current county farm network has served this purpose in the past, but it is shrinking and requires the addition of more farms for research and new entrants. To complete cluster transition in year 6, it requires further practices, such as the acquisition of land for new participants, the creation of cluster activities to attract more people to agriculture and the restoration of nature to towns, which leads to the completion of the cluster transition. Willowbrook cluster has already a high flood risk, which could cause crops damages and leads to erosion by 2050. So how can agroforestry reduce flood levels? Agroforestry increases water infiltration and soil's capacity to store water, reducing flood risk and cleaning water. According to Woodland Trust,
agroforestry systems can help landowners adapt to this change and lessen negative impacts. Forest and tree cover can intercept rainfall and increase the amount of that rain that filters into the ground.
Agroecological transformation will also rely on a broader understanding of data than the material collected via the above channels. This includes the exchange of practical, experiential, and qualitative data through educational, advisory and extension networks. At the end of year 6, farmers will exchange knowledge and facilities with schools and other visitors to build climate awareness and draw public attention to the relevance of agroecology. Unlike third year, the benefits from the practices mentioned before will rise after the 4th year of transition. As it was demonstrated, for the creating new activities it will be also necessary to continue building connection with the surrounding towns. Without radical policy interventions, the dynamics of existing social and environmental injustices will shape future agricultural change via their influence over what sort of research will be prioritized, and how agri-environmental data is owned and used. The next step of the alternative vision blurs the boundaries between research, data and knowledge exchange. Touristic center will allow visitors to stay for a few days on the cluster. In that way, cluster could also involve recruiting farmers and agricultural workers as ambassadors, trialists and network coordinators. Efforts are also required to revolutionize educational approaches to agriculture. After educational and touristic centers will be established, new entrants and workers could spend a few days or a week on the cluster's territory. The training program will allow new entrants get familiar with all types of work and with the latest technologies in research and practice. As a research and education farm, Allerton mentioned that there is
no proper training program at the moment, or ways of entry for young farmers. Young farmer could only come through family farms. Older generations are more set in the traditional farming mindset. Young generations find it easy to be involved and hard to be in charge.
The training areas will include different types of land such as woodland, land along the river and crops and livestock. Thus new entrants will gain more experience during their program time. Clusters will expand and deliver educational sectors, whilst facilitating participatory processes that bring together and support existing networks of farmers, citizens, and third sector organizations. The cluster would thrive with the new developments bringing tourism and educational visits, with an overall increased land value in favor of the farm owners as well as nearby communities. The year 9th practice will benefit the farm cluster from the end of the 7th year. The labor data and expenses will be most needed only in the first few months. If this is implemented at the policy level with the new agricultural bill, the proposed cluster could be a move towards a regional scale connection between farm clusters. Farm clusters and existing policies and subsidies are currently isolated. By coordinating with neighboring clusters to achieve greater regional landscape transformations, smaller farms can undertake regenerative farming practices that benefit the land and the farmers themselves, increasing economic as well as ecological resilience. This transformation has the potential to expand land-based social enterprises from small individual farms to community-managed commons with their own local market, supplying food and open access land to the next generation. They calculate proximity to towns and support from existing cluster networks to identify areas where extra support or incentives might be needed.
Linking Environment and Farming has proposed a national recovery network, similar to the targets of farmer clusters to imply connections, but at a larger scale.
We envision a supercluster corridor that functions across the regional and national scale, connecting isolated woodlands and habitats while ensuring the well-being of rural communities. This project sought to build an awareness and demonstrate the need and the opportunity for the UK to address the issue of land, to entirely transform agriculture in the UK to confront the climate crisis, and undertake a socially and environmentally just redistribution of the English landscape.
Thank you.
Marianne.
Yeah, thanks.
I'll jump in. Marianne, thank you so much. It's a fascinating presentation and a nice contrast to some of the others that we've seen as well. And I think that it is extremely ambitious in its premise in addressing land ownership, and I think particularly the sort of as it relates to more rural agricultural land, and I think also the corporate nature of farming that we see increasing in the UK, and the smaller land holding that we see decreasing. I think that there's a couple of interesting or areas which I'd be fascinated to know more about, and one is the relationship between the scale of the farm that you were studying in Oxford or Oxfordshire, and the relationship to that scale and the amount of produce or the livelihood supported with a farm of that size. I'm aware that some farmers or who have small farms, they actually might also rent farms from other people, so they have enough scale to be able to sustain their lives and their livelihoods. So I suppose I was interested in, let's say, is there an ideal scale for a farm within the current, let's say, current economy? I was also interested about the scale of the fields as well. I think that we see some of the ecological problems in farming being the removal of the hedgerows and the increased sizes of fields, reducing the corridors. I was wondering whether there's a sort of a dimension of field which is ideal for the framework that you're proposing. I have many other questions, but I think I'll leave it at that.
Okay. So I don't think there's one specific dimension for the field, but for example, this the farm.
Can you speak closer to the microphone?
Like that? Yeah. Okay. So the Willowbrook farm is around 17 hectares, which is not so much, but still they can produce beetlebanks and hedgerows, which will benefit their land. So we started from this farm because it's already going in a sustainable way, and it can work potentially with other neighboring farms. So I think if we're taking this project as an example, maybe Willowbrook can be as the best example of the dimension for the farm, and of how the farm of such dimension can work with others, not only in the cluster in Oxfordshire, but also with farms, with farm clusters across the UK. I hope I answered the question. Thank you.
I also have a follow-up question, which I will just drop in while there's a pause. Is you talked about intellectual property, and I think probably you were describing it in the context of the removal of historically of the commons, the enclosure of land, also then intellectual property. I was wondering if you could talk more about, let's say, how intellectual property is relevant to your project. Is there a new, let's say, system of intellectual property, or do you abandon intellectual property as a thing?
I think in my project it was mostly about data storage and sharing and knowledge sharing. Yeah, so to make it more open for people, and the data source also make it open for not only farmers but others who might be interested in this. Thank you for the question.
Just to, in a way, continue this discussion. There's the issue, of course, of land ownership and production, but also more in general, I would talk about activities, because you brought in the idea of education and tourism, so this widens possibilities. But what I found fascinating here is, I just wrote down a series of words as you were progressing, or rather the video with the presentation. It's about permeability, it's about hybridity, it's about, at some point I was about to write blurring, and actually came up in the video, boundary blurring. And then there's a mixing of knowledge, which is both in the practice of the production activities, but then, of course, you brought in education and tourism. So two things, I guess. One, whether this requires a sort of a time map of different forms of ownership or work on the land or presence on the land, maybe similar to the seasonal variations that previous projects proposed. And the other one is really to question the very boundaries of what we can call the farm or the agricultural activity. Because it seems to me that here you have this green friendly monster invading everywhere. So maybe the physical, boundary of the farm proper does not end where we think it does, but it sort of bleeds out in, let's say, officially non-agricultural areas in the city. So that rather than talking about urban agriculture in terms of growing tomatoes on our windowsills or stuff like that, we really have an active presence and work of the farms spreading beyond their boundaries in the city. And I'm not thinking just about markets or selling produce, but because you talked about visiting and opening the farms and education, a possible way to have a sort of dynamic mapping of how what we would conventionally call boundaries of the farm and its activities spread, which I think it's very interesting. It was already, I think, suggested in your images. Could you say something about that? Because I think you have considered it in the project. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for the comments. So actually about this spreading of agriculture farm of, let's say, non-agricultural land, I was working here with the town Kidlington, which is located near the Willowbrook farm, and they already have some existing activities in the town, in the green areas in the town. So for example, they're teaching their citizens of how to grow vegetables or other crops. And I was working with these existing activities, suggesting not only just visiting farms, but creating connections with these existing activities. So it will work together, the town and the Willowbrook farm will be actually the, I don't know how to say it, the one land. And the other thing I wanted to mention, I'm working with, I was working also with connecting cluster farms so they can exchange not only tools but also knowledge, and maybe it can also work in the educational way. Yeah, I hope I answered the comment. Thank you.
Hi, Mimi. Yeah, thank you very much for the presentation. I thought it was, I mean, as a video, it was really like compelling and really well put together, and kind of, yeah, very informative for me anyway, and I think very powerfully structured through the two scenarios. I think I kind of had similar thought to Ed. Really, I was asking myself as we went through, what. Your second scenario was told through this kind of pilot scheme, which had a very specific set of constraints in terms of the land you were working with in the organisation. And I was trying to think, well, what would if these farms did form clusters and the idea of individual field ownerships was removed and those boundaries were removed, based on your practices, what would the most efficient field structure look like? What size would it be to be most efficient in terms of the agricultural practice, but then also the requirements of the biodiversity, and how would that reshape agricultural countryside and landscape? And I don't, I was thinking in terms of like a toolkit, to pass to other farms or landscapes. How could this adapt more easily or readily to other formations? And I think that was what I was kind of intrigued by, I think, the most. I mean, I think there is, with all these projects, there's all those kind of tensions between population, food demand, and then the realistic kind of agricultural outputs and efficiency, and whether can this be proven as a process to scale up to a kind of national scale thing, and what does that mean in terms of outputs? But then, of course, labour as well, which is we're struggling with at the moment. But it's a really, really well told project. I thought I certainly learned a lot in the presentation. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Yeah, I think the video was very skillfully put together. I think I really liked the format that you brought. It's a very good piece of work, really. And I think following up from John's comment, something that could be done in this field of research for projects that follow your trail would be to understand what is the cascading effect, or what are the necessities, or what things need to be changing further down the line for these projects to be successful. I understand that one of the things that farmers need is a certain simplicity at the time of linking to the next supply chain, because a lot of the logistics requires just one product or whatever. Like, it is much harder for them to sell a diversity of products than just simplify their minds and say, okay, I produce wheat, end of the conversation. And that is because the way in which the logistics and the food industry works. And some changes would need to also happen there in order to liberate part of the pressures on these farmers. And it may be perfectly reasonable to expect so, but this type of little maps that perhaps the next research team that works on this can actually map, because it is like the food industry is actually, it has more legs than the ones that we see, than those cows there. And it's part of what John was mentioning, like all these other aspects that have come later on. And typically, the minute you speak with farmers, they would actually say you, yeah, I want to be able to sell my product in one go, or this is too complex for me if I have to juggle too many balls at once. But I guess it is part of the game, and it's part of the research, and it's part of the learning curve of jumping into these type of problems. But actually quite an interesting, definitely video, and the way in which you show the narrative, the scenario, was really brilliant. So I have to say, I can commend you on that.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Marianne. I also think that it came to a very interesting proposition, no? To comparing scenarios of climate change scenarios that are something that it's very relevant today. And I think it's also perhaps important to think about how a project like this can actually perhaps help us visualize, no, the importance of the food system, or those landscapes that are less visible for especially the people that live more in agglomerations, no, like in cities, no, that don't really know how or where the food is produced and what is the impact, no, of those landscapes, no. Issues about soil erosion, or the fact that it's less trees and less biodiversity are things that impact not only the farmers, no, and the actual production of food for the people that live in cities, no, but it goes beyond that. So it's important, to see how crucial, is to learn to see how those landscape actually works, no, to visualize them and to use information, scenarios that scientists are using, no, to see how is the impact in those local landscapes. So obviously there's one thing that you could say, well, a project could be informative, or a way to collaborate, or to see how you can be useful for farmers. But on the other hand, it's also to be informative to perhaps a wider public, to know how this there needs to be a change in the way we use or we produce food, no? There needs to be opportunities to organize it in a different way, no? So agroecology, clusters of farms, things that are already existing, no? And that are not mainstream, how they can actually, if they are, let's say, mainstream, how they could have an impact beyond the actual agricultural field. So that's something that I found very crucial, no? And we hope that this is something that can be also explored, further in the program in the coming years, no? But yeah, thank you very much for that project. And I think with that, we can finalize today's round of presentations. I think it's been great to have the opportunity to have all of, or most of you here in the lecture hall. I mean, it wasn't really certain that this could happen, but it finally happened. And I think we are glad that you also managed to produce these projects and that we have this conversation. I hope you learn and reflect on what you have produced in the last months, no? And yeah, we look forward also to the the books and the submissions of the projects, no? 'Cause this is not necessarily the end. Clara wants to say something before we finish.
Yes, sorry, I couldn't talk I'm working with two devices and it's been a bit crazy. But yeah, I would like to commend Marianne on her engagement and determination to include the science fiction, which came like from her own interests into the project, because I think it has elevated the argument, the discourse, and the relevance to another level. And I think it's also I would like to commend her on the capacity to make concrete something that we hear on the news constantly, that is RCP 8.5. That it seems like a figure that is in the abstract, is a form of measurement that we hear all the time, but we don't have the capacity to imagine its implications. And I think what she did, what the consequences that she built for the future scenario are quite frightening, same as the parable of the sower. And I think it places the conversation in a completely different frame. And I think that not only from her proposal, but from the building of this frame, I think it's a great contribution from this thesis. And I think it's also when Teresa was talking about this like green finger monster and the way it relates to the city, I was also thinking that the monster is already in our fridges, no? Like the agriculture is in there, like through those products. So I think this project is somehow like addressing or making visible the monster actually in that sense. So I think there's something very interesting in there that could work in the conclusions of Marianne's thesis. There's also, I think, this project is commendable in the way it shifts the discourse from the city-centered urban edge to the so-called rural towns, and how like different forms of agriculture, different forms of labor would completely transform those towns. So I think it's one goes hand in hand with the other, and I think that's another of the aspects that this thesis is like bringing to the fore. And also the policies, the agricultural policies that are shaping both the forms of agricultural production and data processing, knowledge and intellectual property, and also how that's related to the lives of the people who live in this rural area. So I think it's a really interesting thesis and presentation. And also, yeah, I would like to congratulate the other three groups and say thanks to all the juries, because I think I was imagining through all the comments and interrogations that you were posing, how they could make, because there's no that much time left, but how this could be really a platform to pose questions and interrogations in the conclusions of the thesis, which are usually left as a brief synthesis of what the project is doing, but how they could be opened up through the questions that the jury posed in each of the previous projects. So thank you very much to the juries and the students for that. Thank you.
Perfect. Well,
Thank you.
yeah. So if there is no more comments, I think we finalize the jury for this morning, but we also encourage you to stay online and in person here, because at 1 p.m. We will have Ed Wall, who is giving a keynote lecture of the EMARC program, which is the first time we do it, so he will be the opening one. And so we look forward to it. So that will happen in about 20 minutes. So it's enough time to have a short break, and I'll see you online in here in 20 minutes. Thank you very much.
Just a quick pragmatic question. The lecture will be on this same link, or we have to go through the Eventbrite?
Yeah, you have to go to the event one.
So the Eventbrite, okay.
Yeah.
So everybody has to leave this Zoom call and go through the event. Okay, that was a question. I don't know if it was linked to this same one. But
No,
it's a different.
yeah, it's a different one. So yeah, thank you very much, everyone.